Alright, well, I'm still trying to figure out the brightness settings and where I want my light to be. Currently, when the sun comes around the door, it is very bright, which is kind of the opposite of the problem I was having last night. But we will pick up where we left off in the quantum and the lotus. Let's see. They were currently discussing the correlation between scientific genius and human value. So does knowledge mean that you're a better person? And does being wiser mean you are going to do good things? Swan. It is inexcusable for any scientist to work knowingly on the development of instruments of death and mass destruction. During the Vietnam War, I was shocked to hear that several great American scientists, including some Nobel laureates, were members of the Jason Division, a committee set up by the Pentagon to advise the military in the development of new weapons. I found it revolting that these great minds would meet each month in order to come up with weapons that would kill as many people as possible. Matthew. Between 1936 and 1976, the Swedish government sterilized 60,000 people who were considered to be inferior. So, like forced hysterectomies. Between 1932 and 1972, 400 American citizens in Alabama, all of them poor and black, were used as unwitting guinea pigs by the Public Health Service in order to study the long-term development of syphilis. Yeah, this study sucks. The patients were promised free health care, plus other minor advantages, including $5,000 to cover their funerals, if they agreed to go in regularly for checkups. In fact, they received no treatment at all. This was known as the Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male, and was quite simply a study of the evolution of untreated syphilis, conducted by doctors and respectable scientists who then published their results in equally respectable medical journals. 28 patients died of the disease, and 100 of secondary complications, while 40 wives and 19 babies were contaminated. The study was abruptly broken off when a journalist, Jean Heller, brought it to the attention of the general public. Not one of the members of the health service that carried out the study expressed the slightest regret. But these were not Nazi doctors. They were civil servants and researchers living in a free country. The victims were finally given some small compensation, but not one doctor was brought to trial. It was only in 1997 that President Clinton apologized in the name of the American people. In 1978, Dr. Hisato Yoshimura received the highest Japanese award for his work on the science of environmental adaptation. During the Second World War, Dr. Yoshimura was the director of Unit 731, which carried out experiments on Chinese and Allied prisoners. An example of his studies on environmental adaptation consists plunging them into ice-cold water, then hitting them with hammers to determine when their limbs begin to freeze. Other experiments included handing out chocolate contaminated with anthrax bacilli to Chinese children to see how quickly they died. These examples are exceptions. Generally, science makes an immense effort to improve the human condition, but they do show that science has no inherent ethics. I firmly believe that scientists should not remain indifferent to the consequences of their research. They must accept the responsibility, especially if military leaders, politicians, and businessmen use their results to wage war, strengthen their power, or earn more money by exploiting the poor and damaging the environment. The arms trade is, in fact, one of the most exasperating examples of hypocrisy of rich countries. 95% of the weapons made in the world are produced by the 5 members of the United Nations Security Council. Another example of a total failure of ethics and responsibility. The same goes for the waste of resources in wealthy countries. $6 billion would give a basic education to the entire planet. That's a good thought. $6 billion, that's all we need. Every year in Europe and America, $12 billion is spent on perfumes, while the world spends $400 billion on illegal drugs and $700 billion on arms. So, all the same, basic research cannot be blamed for these aberrations. No more can human intelligence. They are simply tools. Matthew. Indeed, the pernicious or futile use of research results merely reflects ethical weaknesses. But this is no excuse. Some applications of scientific research, such as genetics and atomic energy, may have whipped up public interest, but most people are not really concerned with ethics. This is a matter for special committees, whose conclusions have little impact on daily life. Political opportunism and, even more, the sacrosanct laws of the free market dominate. Coffee break. Oh, God. Better. Okay. Glaxo, the American pharmaceutical company, is an excellent example of the political opportunism and sacrosanct laws of the free market. That's what we're talking about. Glaxo has threatened to sue the governments of South Africa and Thailand if they produce their own tri-therapy medication for treating AIDS at an affordable price. Glaxo apparently could deprive millions of patients of the chance to live a few years longer. This is a flagrant and scandalous rejection of altruism. Now, there is a little note at the bottom, little asterisk saying that Glaxo has recently, circa 2001, agreed to make its AIDS drugs available. And I do kind of know that the price of AIDS and HIV treatment drugs has gone down significantly in 20 years. So that would probably be a no longer relevant complaint, but probably exists in many other fields. What is more, AIDS research has plenty of funding in wealthy countries. Letting poor countries produce their own treatments would not decrease the company's turnover by a single cent, given that the sick in Africa and Asia cannot afford to buy American products. In Nepal, where I live, an estimated 1 to 5% of the population has been infected, and nobody is receiving tri-therapy. The drugs aren't even being imported. The treatment currently dominated by Glaxo costs about $500 a month, while the average monthly wage is $50. I can easily imagine how disgusted honest scientists are by this sort of business strategy. Another example of the total inability of governments to limit the discharge of toxic gases into the atmosphere, even though it is quite clear that our lives will be seriously affected. Only a worldwide movement based on each person's determination can eliminate this. It is perhaps in this context that a non-dogmatic spiritual approach, such as Buddhism, could play an important role. Swan, how's that? Yes, you. My God. Sorry. Matthew. When I say non-dogmatic, I mean an approach that doesn't condemn progress and naively call for a return to an outmoded way of life, and yet doesn't blindly agree that progress in terms of annual economic growth and technological developments is indispensable for human happiness. If our aim is to be profoundly satisfied with our existence, then some things are essential and others can easily be dispensed with. Buddhism's way of looking at the world allows us to draw up a priority list covering our goals and activities, and thus take control of our lives. Its analysis of the mechanisms of happiness and suffering clearly show the divergent result of egoism versus altruism. Okay. So I paused the video for a second just to find something to put my feet up on, and I promptly dumped my mostly full cup of coffee straight onto the floor. So I've cleaned that up. Everything smells like coffee. My feet are kind of sticky. Probably take a shower later. But we'll move back. We will get back into it because, I don't know, that's probably why you're watching. People who are watching us. Okay. I have since refilled the coffee. I'm also keeping it down there so it can't fall off my table. All right. Okay. Oh yes, we were talking about how a non-dogmatic, how did he say it? Non-dogmatic spiritual approach, like Buddhism or Buddhism. All right, how could it help? Matthew. There's coffee over here. When I say non-dogmatic, I mean an approach that doesn't condemn progress and naively call for a return to an outmoded way of life, and yet doesn't blindly agree that progress, in terms of annual economic growth and technological developments, is indispensable for human happiness. If our aim is to be profoundly satisfied with our existence, then some things are essential and others can easily be dispensed with. Buddhism's way of looking at the world allows us to draw up a priority list covering our goals and activities, and thus take control of our lives. Its analysis of mechanisms of happiness and suffering clearly shows the divergent results of egoism versus altruism. Swan. But what does this have to do with ethics? Matthew. The basis of ethics is extremely simple. Nothing is intrinsically good or evil. Good and evil exist only in terms of the happiness or suffering they create in ourselves or in other people. If we adopt a truly altruistic attitude, so that we are deeply concerned with the well-being of others, then this becomes the surest guide for our judgment. In our daily lives, we will then be able to see far more easily which actions will bring about more happiness and will relieve more pain. This is direct experience, and not a moral theory or a set of predetermined rules. It means paying constant attention to our motives. The mind has been compared to a crystal that takes on the color of the place where it has been placed. It is neutral. Our intentions determine the true nature of our actions, no matter what their appearance might be. The point is neither to condemn those who are driven by hatred, greed, pride, or jealousy, nor to tolerate such destructive emotions as if they were intrinsic parts of existence. Instead, they are treated as symptoms of disease that can be cured if we make the necessary effort. Buddhism's approach is, in fact, extremely pragmatic. Scientific research provides us with information, but brings us no spiritual growth or transformation. By contrast, the spiritual or contemplative approach must lead to a profound transformation in the way we perceive the world and act on it. It is not enough to know, as in quantum physics, that our consciousness can't be isolated from the rest of reality. We must understand by personal experience that it is part of that global reality. The move from theoretical knowledge to direct experience is the key to ethical problems. When our ethics reflect our inner qualities and guide our behavior, then they are naturally expressed in our thoughts, words, and deeds. They thus inspire others. So it's a matter of making theory and experience coincide. Matthew. Yes, this is what brings out the true value of experience. It isn't enough to discover that our own consciousness is intimately bound up with the whole of reality. Our minds must assimilate the implications of this discovery, and our lives must change accordingly. Practicing Buddhists know that when they perceive their own independence in the world, they are filled with an irresistible compassion toward every living being, a compassion that radically transforms their existence. Those who have met the Dalai Lama, for example, know that a few moments in his presence are more eloquent than 100 speeches about love and compassion. As for the Buddhist method of discovery and transformation, it is generally a gradual one. It begins with the absorption and study. It proceeds with intellectual analysis, culminating when we integrate into our being, thanks to meditation, a new way of looking at things and behaving. In this context, to meditate means becoming familiar with this new perception of the world. Comprehension leads to meditation, which is then expressed in actions. We thus pass directly from knowledge to inner accomplishment, and finally to active ethics. Our society produces few wise men. It sets up ethics committees made up of great thinkers. In the Tibetan society where I live, it would be inconceivable to include on such committees people who did not possess indisputable human qualities in every sense of the term. It would be hard to imagine spiritual masters who could excel in teaching spirituality while at the same time remaining selfish, irritable, vain, or bad fathers. No one would ever consult them. Not how Americans think. In the West, committees of wise men are generally chosen according to professional criteria. This is one. Human qualities are less important, and yet it is obvious that true wisdom is a matter of the heart as much as the mind. The spiritual approach could provide us with a guide for personal conduct. In my field, we are faced with numerous ethical problems, which will become even more pronounced in the 21st century, such as nuclear proliferation, the destruction of the environment, cloning, genetic manipulation, and perhaps the selection of certain human characteristics. Should research be controlled? The answer requires a great deal of thought, for it is also necessary to protect the freedom to create and to discover. The imagination must be allowed to express itself freely, otherwise it will die. We have already seen the disastrous effects on science that totalitarian regimes can have, for example in China or in the former Soviet Union. The Lysenko affair in Russia is a case in point. Because he had the support of Stalin and the Communist Party, Trofim Lysenko managed to gag all opposition and from 1932 to 1964 imposed the idea that genes do not exist despite the lack of any experimental proof of that contention. He thus succeeded in setting back Soviet biology and genetics by several decades. Matthew. The Communist Chinese have recently tried to justify their claim of suzerainty over Tibet. There's a word I don't know. I should look that one up. Okay, so it's basically just a relationship in which one state or polity controls the foreign policy and relations of a tributary state. So it's basically territorial government. But I learned a new word today. The social studies teacher just learned a new word for territorial government. Yay. Okay. Matthew was saying, the Communist Chinese have recently tried to justify their claim of suzerainty over Tibet by saying that the study of blood groups revealed connections between the Tibetans and the Chinese. It is a bit as if France would claim ownership over England by arguing the blood cells of British people resemble those of the French. Swan. Society must be aware that some forms of research can go awry. Genetic tinkering could give rise to a new eugenics, with the idea of preserving so-called superior races and eliminating deviant or inferior individuals. William Shockley, who received the Nobel Prize in Physics for inventing the transistor, spent the last years of his life promoting a sterilization program based on IQ. Hopefully I make the cut. Swan. Oh, sorry, he already said that, but he's still talking. I think that scientists shouldn't get involved in certain research without first weighing the moral implications. How should such decisions be made? Like you, I believe that they should be based on altruism and the universal responsibility Buddhism speaks of. Science should organize its research so that it does not harm others. Unfortunately, this is easier said than done. It is extremely difficult for scientists to gauge the true repercussions of their research. To take a well-known example, when Einstein discovered the equivalence of matter and energy while working on his special theory of relativity, He could never have imagined that it would lead to the atomic bomb and the extermination of the inhabitants of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Matthew. Another example is the rather hysterical reaction to the cloning of the sheep Dolly. Remember that? I'm old. Genetics or atomic physics is not the problem. It is the use of that. It is the use that is made of them. As Adlai Stevenson, a candidate for the President of the United States, said in a speech in 1952, nature is neutral. Man has wrested from nature the power to make the world a desert or to make the deserts bloom. There is no evil in the atom, only in men's souls. Science can both protect life and invent the weapons that destroy it. The idea is not to muzzle research. That would be undesirable and probably impossible in any case, but to give greater emphasis to those human qualities that should inspire researchers and decision makers. All of this is also true of intelligence, wealth, and physical strength, beauty, or power. They are all intrinsically neutral tools that can be put to good or bad use. This is precisely why one of the most important elements in Buddhist practice is the development of altruistic behavior. And that is the end of chapter 1.